local, very important person, Karen Fleischer, has organised a Reading for Kids Gippsland, which I'm delighted to be involved in, a competition. Any children in the area to make a short video of the books on the 2021 CBCA shortlist, some aspect that you've done in connection with those books. Doesn't mean you have to read them all, but choose the one that really appeals, and a short one, send it in, and I'll be running a workshop online for some of the people involved in that.
Tell us a bit about who you are, your links to Gippsland, but your wider links to children's literature.
I'm very pleased to speak to you today because I have a soft spot for the area of Gippsland, because I spent my teenage years, my family had a general store in Gippsland, and so when I came to write my first fiction, which was called General Store, I thought I better write about what I know. So I'm going to give you 2 hints today of things for your own writing, because wherever you live, you tend to think it's ordinary, but actually a story has to happen somewhere. So the 2 hints I'm going to share with you are, 1, to use the settings that you know, not necessarily writing about your family, but just to use the things that you know, and to ask the crucial question, what if? Now, I'll share with you a few of the books that I've written. I was first published when I was 27, and General Store was it, but most people know the Hippopotamus on the Roof Eating Cake book. And that happened because, again, some of the best stories occur when things go wrong. And we lived in a suburb, well, we still live in the same house here, and we had a roof that leaked. And my then 4-year-old son said there was a hippo on the roof eating cake. And that was the what if sort of story, which is probably the best known of most of mine. I have about 220 books now. I've been writing for a long time. I'm really, really old, and they've gone into lots of different languages. And it's wonderful when you find a story travels from Gippsland into other worlds. So, for example, General Store, the one I mentioned, where I used the settings of Gippsland, it actually was translated into Finnish. And it was the first book I ever had in translation. And there's something really exciting to open up a package and look at it and think, well, I can't understand any of that because I don't read Finnish. But yes, it's my book. And so this is the other thing. Stories can travel all over the world into lots of different cultures, and that's one of the things that interests me. So I'm a literary ambassador for quite a few organisations, mainly because I think it is so important to read yourself into other worlds. And so what I try to do is to write stories that take people into other worlds and make them see things a little differently. The most recent would, and sometimes I write these with other people, and that's something you might consider too, of co-writing or working with someone else who illustrates your work. For example, the Hippopotamus on the Roof Eating Cake is illustrated by Deborah Nyland. I don't do the illustrations, but we've worked together. And on other books like Hijabi Girl, I've worked with my co-writer Özge, who actually wears a hijab, and the illustrator Serena Geddes. So working together, because I'm not Muslim, and working together, you get an insight into other people's worlds. So the two things are, write about the stuff that you know. Secondly, ask yourself, what if just one thing were changed? And that's the fun bit of the writing. My website, which you'll be given later on, which is hazeledwards.com, pretty easy to follow, it's got a whole lot more information on all the books I mentioned today, and the fact that there are links and ideas and reviews and other things that have happened. But I thought I'd share just a few of them with you today. Now, this is the one that's come out just recently, but it was written quite a while ago, and this is a new copy. It's called Skin Zipped. Now, my family are all redheads, and it means that they tend to have very fair skin, and my daughter got very badly sunburnt when she was young, and her skin started to peel down her nose. And I thought, what if your skin peeled all the way down and unzipped, and your skin fell off and you became a see-through person? How would you cope with that? And so that was the beginning of the idea for Skin Zip Me. Now, I know that probably wouldn't happen, but once you've got a story where you start, what if? I thought, well, how could I get rid of her skin? Because she'd probably put it on again. Oh, she probably dumped it on the floor with the rest of her clothes in her room, and her mother scooped it up and threw it in the wash, and it shrank, so she couldn't put it back on again. So I have this feisty girl doing all sorts of things. Now she's a see-through, feely person, and you can see when she eats a beetroot sandwich because it goes down all the way. So that's one. Second one, again, using ideas, and these are two that have just come out as ebooks recently, but they were written quite a while ago, and for round about the 8 to 10-year-old reader. I had a cousin who was in a wheelchair, and I used to help look after him, and I went wheelchair shopping with him one time, and we got a number plate for his wheelchair and so on, and so I was aware of what it was like to be in a wheelchair. And I thought, what would it be like if your mum came home, she was in a wheelchair? You know, what would change? And so I have it written from the point of view of the girl, Lee, whom I called Leanne in the first book, but I've upgraded her name, and she's now got a bestie. She didn't have a bestie in the first one because you didn't use words like that, because words do change across the years in books. And so she comes up with this fantastic idea of making a garden for her mum on wheels, a herb garden that her mum can look after. And she and the grandfather solve all sorts of things with a little bit of magic. The magic is the imagination, and that's the thing that you really need as a writer. Now, I have been asked by many people, what about some real stuff? Do you write real stuff as well? Well, one of the joys of being a writer is you often get invited to most interesting places. I've been on an Antarctic expedition, and I know there are at least 3 of the Antarctic expeditioners, the tradies who live in Gippsland, but I won't name them because they went down to the Australian base. I was at Casey, and I was the writer down there. Now, that's just an example of going to a place knowing that you're going to write about it afterwards. And that's a bit different from living in a place and using what's around you. So I have a number of books to do with Antarctica. And I was also asked, would you write about your story of your life? And I thought, no, I'm not going to do this, because writers often put things that have happened, but they fictionalize them and they exaggerate. And they're pretty good tall storytellers and make it sound worse than it was or more interesting than it was in real life. But eventually I did. And in here, you might like to know, writers get a lot of fan mail. People write to them and say, oh, I really love your book, or what happened after the end? And if you say, well, I don't know, they said, but you should know, you wrote the book. So my characters often get fan mail. So the hippo gets fan mail. Some children write to the hippo. So I've had questions, and there's a chapter in here of fan mail. Dear hippopotamus, I haven't got a friend. Can I come and sit on your roof? Now, it's very hard as the writer to answer as the character a question like that. But there are lots of other questions that fans write, like, my mum says you shouldn't eat cake. You should eat healthy stuff on the roof, but I like cake too. So, people adopt the character often for book. The Children's Book Council has the book parades, and quite frequently people are dressed up as the character of the hippo. And more recently, they've been dressing up as the hijabi girl characters, not necessarily Melik, who's our hijab one. Some of them have dressed up as Zach, who's a soccer player, and he's got a reading rat called Rattus Rattus, who runs all through the book parade. So quite often I will take things that are likely to have happened in real life and make it sound much worse. So my hints for you are, one, have a look at my website, because I've got a section there for aspiring writers, that is, people who want to be writers, lots of ideas about how you might write things. I also have some ideas and a bit of background on each of the stories I'm mentioning, and particularly Hijabi Girl, because once lockdown is over, there is a fantastic puppet company called Larrikin Puppets in Brisbane, and they've been ready for 2 years now to put on a wonderful performance of Hijabi Girl with puppets. And it's not just the characters who are puppets. They've got an Aussie Rules football that's a puppet too. And they've got a teacher with large red glasses who's a fantastic character. So, and they've got a rice paper roll, a Vietnamese rice paper roll, who's a character, who's a puppet too. So the wonderful aspect of stories is when you can see behind. Oh, well, you can't see because I'm talking, but I'll describe to you. I'm in my study at the moment. And so often I work here, but those stories and those words can travel into other countries. They can travel into other languages, but they can also travel into television or film or puppetry. So when you write a story, it's going to start from, but you don't know where it's going to finish. And so that's the joy of being a writer. And the interesting thing to remember is that story doesn't actually belong to the writer anymore once it's a book. The person it belongs to is the reader. And you've got to, as the writer, give the reader some clues as to what the story's about in the way you choose the words, place the words, put the illustrations there. So it's a sort of code cracking exercise to read a book. And the reader is the most important person, not the writer, the reader. They bring their imagination to the book. Maybe there's a word you don't understand. You can work it out from the other words around it. And if you don't know, ask someone or just keep going, because the joy of a story is that you are living in another world for the period of that story. And when you come out the end of that book, hopefully you'll look at things a little differently.